Good morning. I'm really excited about this current book. It's the only reason why I share some of the specific books because, well, I realized this morning that I'm well past my goal of reading a book a day uh, until at least I hit 500 books. I was surprised when I did it for a year and, achieved that goal, reading a book a day, essentially, right? Shorter books, sometimes two a day, longer books sometimes take a few days. But it worked out to about a book a day. Over a year, I extended it to the 500 because I failed at Read What You Own, because of all these wonderful books coming out, not just being released, but remember, when it comes to audiobooks, a lot of them are being released fairly recent, even if they are an older book. But I just wanted to share Thomas Merton on the new seeds of contemplation. And Thomas Merton is the opposite to me. Thomas Merton was, I think he was a Dominican friar, but don't quote me on that. But Christian, obviously, and he went the route of the Zen Buddhism to explore about Zen Buddhism. Now I'm the opposite. I was definitely, attracted to Zen Buddhism. Ended up becoming a tantric Buddhist, essentially. But what's weird is no one accuses Thomas Merton of being a Zen Buddhist when he talks about the synergy between Buddhism's contemplation and Christian contemplation. But now that I've gone full circle and listened to what Jung said, sometimes you got to go home again, and I've given this expression of faith before, right? When I say Ishvara, what comes to mind? What does it invoke? That's a perfect word to use too. I find that most people in the West, it evokes almost nothing. But if I were to say God, well, that evokes, right? Evokes as opposed to invokes something completely different, right? So I find it funny that I get so often, and it's funny how it ends up being accusational of being a Christian. I mean, if you know me, if you speak to me for any short period of time, you get the impression quite quickly I just happen to know the Bible, and I'm certainly not a Christian by the stuff that I talk about. In fact, I'm even more Christian than that guy I've been reading, Tom Harper, who's well known for believing that Christ is myth. I don't believe that Christ was myth. I actually believe that he likely existed, was an excellent prophet, teacher, like the Buddha, like the Dalai Lama. I mean, you name Gopi Krishna or Swami Vivekananda. They don't have to be gods incarnate to be wonderful teachers, to be wonderful human beings, to be wonderful examples of who and what we can be. I mean, look at Thomas Merton, wonderful man. But what inspired me more was his best friend, Robert Lax, a gentleman who just wanted to be human. And so that's a longer story. I recommend the book on Robert Lax, a gentleman who wanted to get closer to God by stepping away from humanity, only to find that you're never closer to God than when you are your most human. And that's in your darkest moments as well. So I just found it funny how there's this weird affect here in the West. For 30 years studying Buddhism and Tantra, Sanskrit, you name it. And when I say study, yes, I'm a lot of self-directed. But once I started to learn how, okay, well, that's not completely true. I did a lot of courses online, but they weren't what they were until I was able to watch the video lectures. And when we went to Zoom, that was just wonderful. I mean, I can't tell you how many courses since things went to Zoom. And in the temple that I used to give tours in and used to go to all the time, they used to, at first, obviously, until they got to know me, they would assume, right? Christian with an interest in Buddhism instead of the opposite, right? I'm a Buddhist with an interest in other religions, as I guess arguably I'm much closer to, Ramakrishna, um, Vivekananda, the idea of if practiced with devotion and compassion, love, commitment, and charity, metta, maitri, loving kindness, whatever you'd want to call it, that all religions are true. But really, it's about first principles. It's about, as Jung said, the summum bonum, the greater good. Right? And I was just listening to Thomas Merton, and he said so many people take up the mantle of trying to teach other people contemplation before they've even understood it themselves or even successfully achieved anything. I talk about this often. There's a few people in the Buddhist or mindfulness circles who I have mentioned before that have absolutely no stories about how meditation, mindfulness, Buddhism, or any of that has helped them in their real lives. In fact, the one I give example was inspired by another one of these phonies who was inspired by a phony before him. It's funny how second-rate practitioners breed third-rate practitioners. And this young lady, in her bio, even admits that she was looking for a career that she could, make good money in, and so she chose to mindfulness. Imagine, right? Seeing mindfulness as a career, a commercial choice. So, I'll point you to the McMindfulness book, and he didn't even get it all. Like I said, almost the entirety of Western Buddhism is nestled on this lie. Not unlike many other religions, but the real truth is the solution to that is knowledge, is understanding, is a sincere commitment to understanding. Right? That's what science was originally meant to mean. Right? It's still resident in the German word Wissenschaft, where it means to come to understand. Science, but a system of organization and understanding. Right? That's why I said science and philosophy go hand in hand, because philosophy helps you systematize, similar to the way science, but in a broader, it's hard. I won't even bother with that silliness. But I cannot recommend Thomas Merton's book, New Seeds of Contemplation. I couldn't recommend it more highly. On that line, as I said before, I recommend The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. And the reason why I recommend that is if you read The Imitation of Christ, I would recommend Nietzsche's Zarathustra, but that's a little harder for many. But if you read Thomas à Kempis's Little Red Book, I think that would make reading Jung's Red Book all that easier. And when you add to that this idea of the contemplation as our goal, sometimes it's easy to miss that in Jung's work, because, he's trying to understand the nature of these things. So sometimes it's difficult to pull out of his research and his writing a practice. I've been trying for 10 years to develop an active imagination that is based, hopefully entirely in contemplation. But I find it funny how we've gotten to the point now where we don't talk about these things. In fact, the final little note that I'm going to mention, the real reason why I've been researching some of these other areas is because Buddhism itself has some major issues. They have forgotten the soul that's resident in Buddhism. It's called it depends. The self is the Laya Vijnana. That's the storehouse of all your preferences. We can argue whether that exists or not, if that's just allegorical, this idea that we attach to this chitta, this preferences, this list of preferences we call the self, we attach from one moment to the next. But the idea is still sound, that this selfish soul is not a real thing. It's just this list of preferences. The true self is even more blissful than the way the Vedantins explain it. It's even more blissful than even, say, a Christian or a Kabbalist would explain. Because we all have within us this Tathagata Garbha, this Buddha nature, this storehouse of Buddha nature. But what does that mean? That means we have the ability, Buddha, to know, to understand, to realize, to come to understand that we are able to Tathvamasi, I am God, as they say, Esher Eir Esher, I am that. To understand that we are that, the nature, the soul, the spirit, the divine essence, whatever you want to call it. It's resident in Buddhism as well. It's called the Amala Vijnana. This is the perfect consciousness. It's no different than the Sufi idea. Well, I shouldn't go into that. I'm not an expert in that area, but based on the basic research I've done, it seems that nearly every system is an endeavor to come to understand the self, not even God in a sense, right? It's simply this hope to understand the nature of reality through ourselves. I often forget when I talk about the Greek idea of notisotan, right? Know thyself. I often forget that part of that lesson was, moderation in all things, right? And that applies to contemplation. That applies to even knowledge of self, self-help, study, reading. I mean, contemplation is arguably what we should all be doing. As I said, we learn things like algebra. We read books about other times and other experiences and other ideas because we want to develop the pathways in our brains to become right? We oversimplify when we say being a thinking being, but that is something that we constantly work towards, not just maintaining, but we're always growing. Right? I talked about this before. You're either atrophying or you're growing, right? We always misunderstood how the brain works, right? We thought that you just kill brain cells and nothing came back, but it's not. It's a balance. It's a balance. We certainly can't repair or replace at the rate that we can destroy, but isn't that the same, right? I mean, you can gain weight in the matter of a couple of weeks, and that same weight will take you months to take off, right? So it's the same with contemplation, right? As Thomas Merton said, if you find yourself sitting in contemplation for 30 minutes thinking about what you're going to make for dinner, well, you might as well get up. And this is where my teaching comes in, this idea that the Sati Sampajanya, which is from the Sati Patthana Sutra, really early Buddhist teachings. The idea is to remember the teachings of Buddhism, but to carry it to every experience of your waking and even your dreaming life, right? So to remember to bring these principles to all interaction with whatever you might consider the world. So it's not on the cushion. It's not for short periods. It's not only when we label something as meditation or contemplation. As I've said with Buddhism, right, Zazen doesn't mean sitting on a cushion. The idea is to bring this peace to all moments of your life. And it's no different in the Merton contemplation world. The idea is to bring this peace. He said, there comes a time, and this is so true of modern psychology, right? We don't see incremental growth. He says there comes a time when these things will just be, right? You'll find yourself, not as obsessed over the things you used to be, of self and of worth and of ego and of career. And you start to find yourself finding the importance. In fact, that the one thing that I realized this morning is these little truths come to you in the weirdest ways. For me this morning, I learned that my compassion is improperly placed. And as I watch a dozen squirrels just run around me without any sign of fear, it's hilarious. In fact, I think they're upset because my wife usually brings um, peanuts when she comes with me on this walk. And we feed the squirrels here at the Roman Catholic Church up the street. We come and visit the Lady of Carmel, Mount Carmel statue they have here. Um, when the lockdowns came, I wasn't able to go to my Buddhist temple. My particular deity of choice, if I can say it, I'm being funny, but was the Buddha of compassion, right? Because that's what I needed. That's what I felt the world needed more of, was compassion. Always been devoted to the Bodhisattva of compassion, because this idea that they felt so strongly that people needed help, that they said, you know what? I've achieved enlightenment, but I'm not going to give up on the other sentient beings. I'm going to continue to be reborn until all sentient beings are liberated. And for me, this morning, I came to the realization that it's exactly what Thomas Merton said. He said there comes a point where you just realize that yourself has been relegated for the other. Right? I've talked about this, the I and the other, of Martin Buber, or line 6 of the Isha Upanishad, or from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, or from the Bible. It's all the same idea. But for me, on my walk in the morning, it's hilarious. I got a little squirrel sitting here staring at me like, "Where's the peanuts, bud?" I'm sorry, bud. I didn't even think to bring peanuts. I was so involved in the Thomas Merton book, and of life, obviously, too, that it just blindsides you sometimes. See, I'm a Buddhist from way back, so I do some silly things. Like, for example, I walk by a school that for some reason every morning the worms come out, uh, by the dozen, and they try to cross the sidewalks, and they end up getting trampled by all the school kids. So I found myself this morning, more than usual, trying to pull some of these poor little guys out of the murder path. But as I was doing that, something struck me. Right, this leitmotif in a lot of literature and writings about how we're just a worm. It struck me and made me realize that so many of us have compassion for some of these lower beings, and so many of us even have compassion for the earth itself or nature. But we forget compassion for each other. Right? So reaching down and picking up and helping all these poor little souls, these little earthworms, made me realize how many souls are going, I don't know. I wouldn't say helped, because as Thomas Merton says, they have to help themselves. But how many souls are left forgotten? I know I can be thankful that I'm not. I, for a long time, felt I was a lost soul. Yesterday, I had some inflammation troubles in my shoulder where, oh boy, it was painful all day. It really was. And tough to even use the arm, period. And unlike usually, I didn't. At first, I thought it was a little bit sad because I had a lot of ideas, and I had a lot of plans for the day. But then it just made me realize, right, as they say, you give with one hand and take with the other. Right? It made me realize how much blessings I do have in my life. Right? As they say, you learn more from a failure than you do from a success. It's funny how we don't realize that truth when it comes to suffering. And particularly in the moment. That's what I have to be thankful for. Right in the midst of being in pain and feeling like I was suffering, it made me realize that, oh, Jesus, I really am lucky in so many ways. roof over my head, and people that love me, and wonderful ideas that I can devour and well, and hopefully someday learn how to share. All right, but on that note, I'll leave you. The thing that keeps coming to mind, though, is the conquering worm. Isn't that a wonderful idea? I always misunderstood what it was talking about. But if you think about it, we are not much more than a worm, but we are the conquering worm. So let's be a magnanimous and compassionate conquering worm. And remember that we're struggling to get by. We're all wriggling. Arguably, many of us lucky enough not to be on the hook. But we all know our destiny is it's either at the end of that line or it's on the sidewalk waiting for a little guy to step on you. And all we can do is, as Kipling said, is fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distant run. And as he says, the world is yours if you embrace it.